Okay, thank you. I work now at an hospital of Normandy. I have no much of many patients. Essentially, I work on the retrospective studies to know the long-term outcome of a patient treated upon 10 years, and to know what is the best combinations of available treatments, to know what treatment to associate to get that outcome.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Lorenzo Dagna. I come from Milano, Italy, and from San Raffaele Hospital. We follow a large cohort of patients with erdheim-chester disease in Italy, and we are devoted in studying specifically the inflammatory aspects of the disease. Clearly, a huge step forward has been made in understanding of the disease and treatment with the discovery of the mutation that Juvianee just a couple of minutes ago described to you. We are actually trying to find out a solution for patients who do not have this mutation, but also for patients who have targeted mutation, but for a number of reasons may need something more from the treatment. So when the treatment is not able to fully control their symptoms, or when they relapse. So the idea is to, in our group, specifically to study all the aspects, all the inflammatory aspects of the disease.
Hello, everybody. I'm actually the Benjamin. I work with Eli Dine at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Since he couldn't be here today, he asked me to go over and discuss some of the studies that we're doing at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So, what we do is a phase 2 clinical trial using cobimetinib for adults with histiocytic disorders, which includes erdheim-chester disease, longer onset histiocytosis, Rosai-Dorfman disease, and the clinical trial is for ECD patients without BRAF mutation, or have a patient can have BRAF mutation but cannot obtain or cannot take the BRAF inhibitors. And 7 out of 7 of the patients that we've had thus far have improved on the study, and there are 11 spots remaining for more patients to enroll. And the medication is actually provided by the company in this trial. We also have a pilot study of ETNF fluorochole PET to improve accuracy of diagnostic biopsy in histiocytic disorders. So what we do is we test a new kind of PET scan performed when biopsy is done to diagnose ECD or to obtain tissue for genetic testing. And the PET scan uses choline, which is used by cells that are dividing. And hopefully this PET will identify ECD cells more specifically than regular FDG PET alone. The participants get both PET scans and biopsies of 2 ECD sites, and results are compared. And 3 patients have enrolled, and there are 2 spots remaining for this study. We also have a prospective study of the natural history and genetic landscape of the histiocytic disorders. So we have a biospecimen protocol. The ECD patients actually give blood, urine, cerebrospinal fluid, that you may hear as a CSF, and it's stored for research. And these are analyzed for gene mutations, markers of inflammation. And we have 54 ECD patients enrolled so far, with greater than 200 samples for this study. And we're still accepting more patients. We also have a clinical, structural, and functional neuroimaging study for cognition in adult patients with histiocytoses. And this is a detailed study of the brain function in patients with ECD, and it's funded by the ECD Global Alliance. And participants undergo an MRI of the brain. They get some cognitive testing, ask them questions to check their memory and quality of life and symptom questions. And they're also trying to detect early brain changes in ECD and patterns of thinking and memory problems. And we have 30 spots available for that study. And there's also the ECD Global Registry that is being held in MSK, CC, and New York and Newcastle. And this is also funded by the ECD Global Alliance and collects clinical information, scans about ECD patients over time, and all ECD patients are encouraged to participate. They can enroll by telephone. They can also answer surveys online about their symptoms, quality of life with the disease, and ways ECD affects their lives. And there's an option to collect blood or urine on this study, and this actually opens in January of 2017. And so those are some of the studies we have going on at Sloan Kettering that Eli asked me to present during this part since he was unable to be here today. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. And we'll answer questions during the panel if you have any on this. Yes?
I'm an ECD patient, and the thing that I've always got trouble understanding. I'm an ECD patient, and the thing I've always got trouble understanding is how all this wonderful research actually comes down to the patients and what drugs they take. Now, we see that a lot of research is done in the US and France, but I'm based in Australia, which is obviously specific, but how do we know, or how long might it take, and I know that's difficult, when you put all your results together, what is the rough process? Does it need to be approved in the US first, and then it rolls out into other countries as an approved treatment? Is there a standard process, or is it fragmented? You know, how it gets to market in effect?
So, I mean, each country has its own base methods, and others on the panel will mention as to their countries for getting treatments approved. In the US, in the United States, we do have to do these clinical trials to get enough evidence to show our FDA, which is the company, the actual agency that approves drugs in the United States for use clinically. And they have to see the data from clinical trials, and they have to see improvements before they'll allow us to actually start the drug on the clinical market for a particular disease. And it doesn't have to be approved as far as the United States before it goes to other countries. Other countries are independent of what happens in the United States based on my understanding, but others from the panel can answer these questions, and also Juvianee from the US, and he can answer more questions on this as well.
Probably don't need a microphone, I'm used to talking loud. I'm an ECD patient. I've been on bumurafenib for 2.5 years now. Is there any point in me giving blood and urine samples? Because, you know, am I fixed? You know, would it actually show you anything?
Does anyone want to take that?
Would there be any information coming from my samples if I've been on Zelboraf for 2.5 years on bumurafenib?
Well, there would be. I mean, one of the reasons why we collect blood, urine, and sometimes CSF is because we actually have a capability of detecting tumor DNA actually even from these samples, definitively from blood, okay. Sometimes even from urine. So what we are actually learning that, I mean, we might be finding some secondary mutations which potentially down the line might actually affect the longevity of the efficacy of drugs like bumurafenib. That's not only it. You can also follow some inflammatory markers and actually learn about the kind of an immune component of the erdheim-chester disease, about the inflammatory component of the erdheim-chester disease. So I mean, we actually follow all of these translational aspects, and which potentially help us to understand what's going on. So I actually think it's crucial, and I think it's quite important.
Okay, no, and also, although physically I look okay, I think, my brain, my memory is just terrible. So, you know, giving samples like that might actually flag something up that's happening up here, even if I look okay, possibly. Yeah. So I'll get in touch with Newcastle. Thank you.
Oui, bonjour. Alors moi je suis aussi un patient erdheim-chester, mais français. Alors je ne sais pas combien on est avec cette maladie, mais ça ils pourront nous le dire. Mais est-ce que nous, c'est un intérêt en tant que Français de participer finalement aux recherches américaines? Est-ce qu'il faut à la limite, pas tous, si on est 250 ou 300 à avoir cette maladie, s'inscrire à tous les protocoles de recherche pour faire avancer et qu'ils aient suffisamment finalement d'échantillons et de personnes pour avoir des résultats statistiquement valables, quoi. Alors c'est une question, je sais pas, parce que je vois qu'il y a 11 par-ci, 11 par-là, enfin 7 patients. Statistiquement, sur 11 patients, enfin, vous faites rien. Hein. Je sais pas.
It's very important to collaborate, like the number of patients with ECD right now in the world is probably, I don't know, between 500 and 1,000. It's very difficult to know. I think there's 320 that are registered or a bit more, and some of the patients are not registered in the ECD Global Alliance, and so it's important that almost all the patients should be, if possible, included into trials and into a registry or into studies where you can collect samples, tissue specimens, and because like that you can build larger series and see and find new clues and new therapeutic to find either new drugs or new regimens of treatments that could be able to put the patients in remission. And so no, it's really important that all the patients be referred to a center either in Europe or in the States, depending on where they are living. And it's important that they are all in probably in a registry that we are trying to build in the next couple of months and years.
Je disais juste, oui, sur le fond, mais comment fait-on ensuite pratiquement pour recueillir les données, voilà.
So what do we do practically to happen?
Oh, okay. So practically, well, things are moving since 3, 4, 5 years because we now collaborate more. There's now trials. There's now a larger series of patients either on this side of the Atlantic or in the States, and it's a force meeting, and so we're a small community of doctors and we meet each other quite a lot. We exchange, and so we have more data, and we understand better both the pathophysiology of the disease, the thing with the mutations, BRAF and other mutations, and we have more drugs, more treatments, and so things are growing up and in the good direction, I believe.
If I could add that it takes meetings like these to bring the patients together and their families to learn about the trials and the studies that are being done around the world, and so that you will take the information that you receive from this meeting and you can ask the questions if there is a clinical trial that you may be eligible for. I encourage you the registries are so important in ECD as in other rare diseases because it allows a collection of information about the patients. When you say how many cases of ECD are there in the world, the range can be 500 to 1,000, but we're not sure because they don't have the numbers. The scientists don't have the numbers. And the numbers are needed. Unfortunately, this is what is needed for researchers to show, justify why they're doing their studies. The numbers of patients also can encourage the biotech and the pharmaceutical companies to put their efforts into developing a treatment, to take the studies from the scientific community and to bring them into the clinical trial pipeline. And the pipeline then for clinical trial, the phases of 1 and 2 and 3. And if there is an opportunity for any of you to be eligible to participate in a clinical trial, find out as much as you can about that trial. Speak to your primary physician to see if it's a right move, and then discuss it with yourself, your family, to ensure that you make an informed decision to participate in a clinical trial, because that will further treatment for this disease. You agree? Okay. For any of the trials that are going on now, For those, say, at Sloan Kettering, are they available internationally? Can you, or are you just taking from a certain area?
They're available internationally.
Okay, and that information is on the clinicaltrials.gov site?
Yes.
Right, okay. If there's anything that you come away with from this meeting, it is to go visit clinicaltrials.gov, and it will list all the clinical trials, and you put in erdheim-chester, and it will list the clinical trials that are currently recruiting, and if you read through it, it's not too bad to read through, you will find out where these the centers of excellence are, and that you can contact them. And believe me, they're all looking, if they're looking for clinical trial participants, they will welcome your emails, your phone calls, so that you can put in touch with a clinical research organization and to see if you're eligible.
Gina, add something to it. I mean, clinicaltrials.gov is easy to navigate through, but the information is not always accurate because the clinical trials is very dynamic environment. The situation is changing, the slots are opening and closing, and the website is not perfectly kind of designed to actually keep up with that. In addition to that, I mean, there was a change in culture that a lot of cancer trials actually now allow ECD patients to go on without actually having it specifically stated in the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So I mean, if you use just a normal search, you might not come up with. So I mean, I would actually support that clinicaltrials.gov is a good resource, but another resource is actually to check with the care centers. And at the end of the day, there are not that many. So I mean, essentially, if you check with some of us, of all of us who are actually sitting there, we will either direct you to our own stuff or stuff which some other people, are doing.
Are there any studies looking at people who are supposed to be already in remission? Because I was treated before all the BRAF was started, and I was put on methotrexate, and that worked. I'm supposed to be in remission now and continuing that, but are you looking at any studies for people who are already in that state?
Well, I think there's the possibility that the ECD research community will develop a study to look at risk factors for developing ECD. And that was something we discussed yesterday. It's quite an ambitious project, but I think could be done. And you would be a very important person to be on that.
Hi, I'm Dr. Estrada, and I'm working as a clinical geneticist in the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. We have been studying patients with erdheim-chester disease since 2011. Right now we have two studies. The first study that opened was the natural history study, which we call clinical and basic investigations into erdheim-chester disease. The study was open, or is still open, as a observational study. We don't do interventions. We bring the patients for 1 week at the NIH, and they get a full set of, or a battery of tests that include clinical evaluations by me, by a neurologist, by a dermatologist. They get evaluation by rehabilitation medicine, physical therapy, occupational therapy. They also get to see a neurologist depending on how bad they're affected neurologically speaking. They also get neurocognitive testing, and they also get a neuro-ophthalmology evaluation to check how the eyesight is going, and if there's any other clinical service that is needed, such as cardiology, endocrinology, we'll add it to that week. Patients also get a lot of comprehensive radiology tests. They get scanned from head to toe using whole body PET scan, or and also whole body bone scan, MRI of the abdomen, pelvis, and cardiac CT, cardiac MRI, and many other imaging. At least there are probably 7 imaging procedures done while the patients are there. And this is something that we do from Monday through Friday. The patient usually flies into the DC area on the weekend, and then we discharge them the following weekend if everything goes well. If there is the need to keep the patient because there's something else that we would like to address, we ask the patient whether they can stay an extra week or a couple of days. And all of this is free of cost for the patient. We don't charge for patients that come to the NIH. However, patients that come from overseas, we cannot pay the travel. But once they reach the United States, anywhere, it could be in any of the 50 states or any of the possessions of the US, the NIH usually takes care of the cost to reach the hospital. Patients need to come with a family member, and the family member is not going to stay in the hospital, so we put them either in one of the lodges that we have on campus or in a hotel in Bethesda. And all that is free of charge for the family. The other study that we have is the phase 2 trial, which is more involved. Patients need to come to the NIH at least 9 times in 1 year, and then 3 to 4 visits the second year. And that's a trial just for patients that have the BRAF mutation, and we're treating them with the dabrafenib and trametinib. The drug is given to us by the pharmaceutical company that developed it, which was GlaxoSmithKline. Now it's being passed to Novartis, and it's a trial that's being monitored by the National Cancer Institute and also by the Food and Drug Administration, which is the agency of the U.S. government for the approval of medications. So that is just for the USA. In terms of approval, other countries have, like Benjamin was saying, they have their own mechanisms or way to approve drugs. Some drugs are approved in other countries. For example, rapidase, which is an enzyme for rare glomerular metabolism, was approved here in Europe, but not in the US. So it depends on how each country does their approvals, but a lot of countries take what the Food and Drug Administration approves as a guideline or something to follow, and they can mimic what they do. However, this is something that happens through years. It's not something that happens from one day to another. That trial that I'm talking about has room right now for 1 more patient after for a total of 6. Once we give an interim report to the FDA and they see that there is efficacy, we will be allowed to recruit 6 more patients, and the goal is to treat 18. After that, then it goes for review and possible approval, unless they want us to do some other evaluations on the patients, or they propose some other interventions to be done before they agree. Both of the trials are open to any patient that can come to the United States. And also, even though the phase 2 trial is just for patients that have a BRAF mutation, the natural history study is basically open to anyone. They just need to have confirmed diagnosis of erdheim-chester disease and have their pathology evaluated by us. If you have ECD and you haven't been tested through genetics because it's either not available in your country, not covered, or it's too expensive for you, but you cannot come to the United States, we also have what we call a tissue donation only study. You give us consent and you send us at least your pathology, and we will do the genetic testing for you. And it's something that you can use in your country for treatment purposes, because it's what we call CLIA certified. It's not just a research study. It's done through research, but you're able to use that as information that someone can use in order for you to get treatment. There are some patients here in the audience that have been at the NIH, and if they self-identify, I encourage you to discuss with them in case you're interested in coming and spending 1 or 2 weeks at Bethesda.
We only have actually 1 trial, which is called the LOVE study, which is a treatment of interruption of targeted therapy. Like if you have been at least 6 months under a BRAF inhibitor, then you stop the treatment and you see what happens, and you see if you are still in remission or if you relapse. And so this is an ongoing trial, and the rest is something we've been doing for more than 10 years. We see patients in hospitalization, and we do many exams to assess the activity of the disease. And we are obviously helped by a lot of doctors in many specialties at Pitié-Salpêtrière, and some of them you'll be seeing later on today, on various aspects of PET scan, MRIs, and we, of course, have our many to follow the clinical activity of the patients, as we see a lot of patients. We've been seeing more than 170 patients so far with ECD, and we have a special interest in the hematologic malignancies associated to erdheim-chester disease. So we work on mutations, of course, access to targeted therapy, either BRAF inhibitor or BRAF inhibitor associated to MEK inhibitor. We have 15 patients so far treated by MEK inhibitor, which is also a treatment that works very well. And so it's seeing as many patients and trying to keep on treating as many aspects of the disease as we can. And we are also particularly interested in this central nervous system involvement and the psychiatric disorders, and we're trying to do some tests as one as the MS, the memorial slow catering, are developing in a regular manner as well.
I'm actually a medical oncologist from MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, which is quite large cancer hospital. And what I actually do for a living, in addition to taking care of patients with ECD, I'm actually a clinical trialist, so I do clinical trials for a living. And so I was actually asked to talk a little bit about clinical trials and how they fit the medical care and how they fit perhaps ECD. So just to introduce you to my program, I mean, we are the largest cancer drug development program in the nation and probably in the world as far as I know. We have about 150 clinical trials which at the moment are on the priority list for patients with cancer, including ECD, which actually lately has been classified finally as a cancer as well. Our mission is to bring new drugs to cancer patients, and by doing that, to improve the outcome by translating observations to from the clinic to the lab and back. So, what is the goal of clinical trials? Why do we all of that, and why do we think it might matter to you? I mean, there are essentially two questions. I mean, the most important one from the patient perspective is probably, does the new treatment work, and is the new treatment safe? These are essentially two questions which clinical trials try to address. In addition to that, the clinical trials are actually done through several phases. And the phase one, that's actually mainly what I do. That's when the drug, which was made in the lab, tested in the laboratory animals, is actually taken to the clinic and is tested for the very first time in human beings. That's called phase one. I mean, the goal of phase one from the scientific perspective is not necessarily efficacy. It's about describing the side effects, and it's about determining the dose. But obviously, the motivation of the patients, and I would argue the motivation of treating physicians, is obviously different, because we would like to see our patients benefiting. And the culture is kind of shifting in a way that there have been actually preliminary approvals, at least in the United States, which were essentially based on extremely encouraging phase one data. Then the drug actually moves to the phase two, or the treatment in which there, in a small cohorts in different diseases, is addressed the specific efficacy, and the phase three is essentially comparing the new treatment approach to the existing treatment approach, or placebo if there is none, and then ultimately might lead to the drug registration. As you can see, this process unfortunately can take easily up to 10 to 15 years, which is quite excruciating. On the other hand, with the arrival of targeted therapies, we have examples now in which we were able to substantially shorten the timeline, which actually led from the discovery of the target to approval being done within even 3 or 4 years, which is some examples for some targeted therapies in certain cancers. So what are the advantages of clinical trials? I mean, for mankind, it's quite clear. I mean, we increase the knowledge about particular disease, its therapy, and efficacy or lack of thereof. But there are also advantages for individual patients. The patients actually, there are studies which actually showed that the patients in clinical trials do have reasonable or favorable outcomes compared to patients treated outside of clinical trials. And part of that might be that simply you just get an access to therapies which otherwise wouldn't be available. So it simply just gives you one more option, or two more options. The second thing is that because you have to follow the protocol, the things are actually done in very much standardized way, which sometimes also means that it's actually done in the way which is a state of art. Unfortunately, the trials also has advantages, and they are not insignificant. I don't see really any disadvantages in for mankind, providing that things are done right and ethical way. But for the individual patients, the challenges can be substantial. I mean, Dr. Estrada-Veras just presented his studies which they done, very important studies which they do in NIH. And as you could have heard, I mean, you would need to travel to the United States, and even though NIH actually puts in immense support in making it happen, then you would actually need a schedule for the clinical trial, which is often far more intense and far less flexible. So it can have all sorts of consequences on patients' lives, financial consequences, time commitment, and last but not least, I mean, there is always an element of side effects which might actually happen and might be unexpected, even though the likelihood of severe side effects and life-threatening side effects on phase 1 clinical trials, which is the first step in the clinical research, is actually 0.5% over the last number of decades, so it's not very high. So why should we consider clinical trials? I mean, the result of clinical trials are important for developing new therapies, for actually convincing payers to pay for the new therapies. So that might be actually the case of vemurafenib or dabrafenib, trametinib. Once we get these medications approved, it might actually make a whole lot easier to discuss with payers to reimburse these therapies for our patients. And they are really necessary tool to make the progress happen. So what should be the strategy specifically for the ECD? So I mean, I think all of us who are sitting at this table and who are actually at this conference, we have really seen dramatic improvement which happened over the last few years. And I think there were two things which were essential, and that was actually collaboration and communication, which led to discoveries, which led to clinical trials, and which actually really kind of facilitated, along with having all the right tools, the development in the ECD. But we also have limited resources, financial resources, and there's also a limited number of patients. I mean, we assume that there is about 500 to 1,000 of patients diagnosed around the world. There are probably more patients suffering from this disease who are not diagnosed. But I mean, it's a kind of a limited resource which we have to work with to actually maximize our knowledge and maximize benefit to our patients. So what we can do? So I mean, the phase 1 studies, we can probably actually, now many cancer studies allow ECD patients to go on. But I think I would probably reserve these studies for patients who really don't have any therapeutic options, and I would rather actually strategize that we should find a way how to give our patients to access to several crucial projects. For the patients with BRAF mutations, I think we should have two dedicated efforts. One would be for vemurafenib, and the other one would be for dabrafenib and trametinib. And these studies should be somehow available through all the care centers around the world to give the access, so we can actually generate the data which we can provide to regulatory agencies and payers. It's a little bit harder for patients with BRAF negative disease, but I think we saw encouraging data from multiple institutions on the both sides of the Atlantic. And it looks like the medicines such as cobimetinib, most likely, or perhaps trametinib, might be actually a reasonable option, at least for some of these options. That should be probably another effort which should go in multi-center fashion, full speed ahead, and which should result in registration, providing the data pan out. Phase 3 studies, which is really kind of a randomized trials, I don't think it's really feasible in ECD given the rarity of the condition and given the fact that actually at the moment we don't even have any standard therapies really approved. So the resource for clinical trials, as I said, clinicaltrials.gov is a good resource, but I would definitely also check care centers. There are not that many. I mean, essentially, if you check with any of us, I think you would get quite a lot of information what's going on the both sides of the Atlantic. ECD Global Alliance is a wonderful resource. Clinicaltrials.gov, a little bit harder to get around, but also a reasonable resource. Few studies which we have which we have at Anderson, which in general actually accept ECD patients. Although again, that being said, I still think our priority should be the dabrafenib trametinib study, such as the one which NIH does, which should result in registration, or cobimetinib study for those without BRAF mutation. We have actually multiple studies with multiple targeted agents for BRAF mutation positive or BRAF mutation negative patients, which can be considered down the line as a backup option. So take-home message, and this is my last slide. I think the clinical trials should be a part of standard of care for ECD patients because that's the way forward. And once we address one question, we can move forward and address the other one in kind of a structured fashion. And there should be two major efforts for BRAF for BRAF positive patients, there should be one or two major projects which again should aspire for nothing less than registration, and one or two efforts for BRAF negative patients which again should aspire for nothing less than registration, registration and reimbursement. I think that's about it, and thank you so much for your attention.
You mentioned targeted drugs might only take 3 or 4 years. What's the definition of targeted compared to normal? I don't understand.
So targeted therapy essentially means that you have a target which you believe is a crucial thing for cancer to sustain itself, and you use the therapy which specifically goes after that target and abrogate that mechanism of action. So one example would be BRAF mutation, which makes the BRAF protein more active, and which ultimately leads to increased cancer survival, proliferation, and cell division. And we go after that with BRAF inhibitor and essentially stop that mechanism. So that's the definition of targeted therapy. Non-targeted therapy would be something more like, let's say, if we stay in the ECD world, like interferon or anakinra, which actually may have some, which actually has some effect on inflammation, but does not necessarily specifically shut down effectively one target mechanism.
With NIH and Sloan Kettering and other, I guess, government-funded institutions, all the research you do you share that freely with drug companies, or how do the results of your work end up, I guess, with manufacturers?
So actually, I mean, these things need to be done in collaboration with all industry partners, academic partners, patients and patients advocates, and regulatory agencies as well, because if one component of that process doesn't work, you increases the chance of failing. So I mean, drug companies need to be part of it, because I mean, obviously, if there is something either right or wrong coming out of it, they need to know that. I mean, in the trial which NIH runs, I mean, I don't necessarily say the Novartis has too much say in that, right? It's really run by NIH rather than NIH and CIC mechanism. I think it's probably what I can say to that. I mean, what is the challenge in the rare diseases? That obviously the pharma industry is mostly for-profit type of industry. It's kind of a little bit challenging to get buy-in from all of these sides for something which necessarily may not lead to profits. But I think we are relatively successful in achieving that.
Our trial was designed to have monitoring from the Food Drug Administration, the National Cancer Institute, and the pharmaceutical company that developed the two agents that we're using. So they were involved in protocol development. They gave us the guidelines of how we can apply an oncological trial to erdheim-chester disease, because at that time, ECD was yet to be classified as a cancer. And even for me to come here and talk about the trial, the pharmaceutical company had to approve that I can speak about things that are not yet published in the literature. So they're really close to what we are doing. They don't determine who I treat, or, well, they do in a sense with the criteria that they have developed or assigned to the study. But anything that has to do clinical, that is our responsibility, and we let them know what's going on. But they want to know of adverse events, the efficacy, is if it's worthwhile to even to keep the trial open. They're always monitoring. Every 3 months we need to send them a report. And that report is shared with the NCI, the pharmaceutical company, and also the FDA. And eventually this would lead to approval of the therapies. One thing that we're trying to do, because since you heard about the 2-3 year time frame for a drug approval, that might be after everything has been finished with the study, but there are some pathways in the FDA and the USA that you can look for what is called ultra rare neglected abandoned diseases, and the approval pathway for those medications for those diseases is relatively faster. We've had successes that within 6 months we've had approval for certain therapies, and that's one of our goals, that after we have the information, even though cancer is, or some clinical trials with cancer have many patients. We don't have that many patients with ECD, so we can still categorize it as an ultra-rare, abandoned, and neglected disorder, and that approval process can be faster. That's something that we want to do, and we haven't done it yet because we need to submit the application for that, and they might still decline it, and we might still have to go to the regular route, but that's another way that we can get the approval faster.
Oui, bonjour à tous et à toutes et à tous. Donc j'ai la maladie d'Erdheim-Chester depuis plusieurs années. Lorsque je suis allé la dernière fois à la Pitié-Salpêtrière sous le gouvernement indétrônable de M. Haroche, il m'a été préconisé 2 médicaments. Donc le Zelboraf et un autre médicament qui a été entériné par le neurologue-oncologue. Le premier, le Zelboraf, est pris en charge à 100% par la sécurité sociale, et le deuxième n'est pas aujourd'hui pris en compte par la sécurité sociale et donc n'est pas remboursé. Et je crois savoir que ça doit être autour de 6 000 € par mois à peu près. Le neurologue-oncologue m'a dit qu'il s'agissait simplement de prendre un décret pour prendre en compte ce médicament. Alors je ne suis plus député, je ne peux plus vous aider, mais on ne sait jamais, je connais encore beaucoup de monde au gouvernement. Et est-ce que ce médicament, dont je ne me souviens pas du nom d'ailleurs, est-ce que ce médicament évolue aujourd'hui pour une prise en charge par le patient, et en quoi ça pourrait compléter le traitement par le Zelboraf?
Dr. Haroche can finish, but the main question was about subsidising the price of the drugs. The first one, Zelboraf, is covered by the French system, but the second one isn't, and it costs up to 5,000 euros per month for the cost. And to be honest, I missed the last part of the question.
Yes, so the last part of the question was the fact that you were a deputy, and if you could help reimburse the treatment. The second treatment was Coteric, and I don't remember if you're not actually paying 6,000 euros. You're paying this amount for getting the drug, or you're not? Are you taking cobimetinib with Zelboraf, or you're just taking Zelboraf?
Je prends que le Zelboraf.
Parce que l'autre est pas
on m'a dit que c'était le même prix que le Zelboraf, et c'était pas pris en charge par la sécurité sociale.
Okay. So that's true that cobimetinib has been approved by the European Drug Agency in January 2016, and that we are trying to give it to patients, and it doesn't seem as easy as what we did with Zelboraf almost 4 years ago. Social Security is actually not reimbursing Zelboraf normally. I mean, if the Social Security looks for the prescription of Zelboraf, which is an off-label prescription, they could as well say we're not going to reimburse, but they're not doing it because Zelboraf has been on the market for a longer time than cobimetinib. And so it's true that we're having a major problem right now for the patients who are trying to put on cobimetinib, either on add-on therapy with Zelboraf or on monotherapy for certain patients who are on who we believe have to get the drug cobimetinib. And for the past couple of weeks now, there has been major problems with pharmacists, either in Paris or outside in Nantes, I believe, who are calling and saying we cannot give the drug because it's not the proper indication. And we're trying to, this is for the French level, we're trying to get over this and try to convince the drug agency to reimburse like they have been doing for Zelboraf. But that's one of the problems to try to get access to this drug outside of a clinical trial. This is in France. We're not. I mean, in Pitié-Salpêtrière, we're giving the drug Isozelboraf or cobimetinib, which is the anti-MEC drug you were referring to. We're giving it out of a clinical trial. For vemurafenib, there is, we are now, I forgot earlier to say that we are in the basket trial. There is, it's called Achille in France, and so we are sometimes putting the patient into this trial, but that's a major problem right now, at least for a MEC inhibitor. If you try to get it outside of a clinical trial, I imagine in Italy too they have this kind of issue, even for vemurafenib, I guess.
In Italy, it's sometimes it's not a nationwide clear. It's not the same process all over the nation, because the Italy is divided in different regions, and the approvals for drugs is restricted to in some regions, and so we sometimes, when we make the prescription, we have a hard time to get it approved in certain regions in Italy. Nowadays, what we have to do is to write a medical report, to ask the primary care physician to help us in this process of approval. And I would say that in the last few years we didn't have much, in the last few months actually, we didn't have much trouble in getting that approved. Most of our applications were met. So for other drugs, it's always a patient by patient basis. It's really different, and there's no clear regulations, and mostly depends on the region where the patient comes from.
I just want to make a quick comment, because probably we are speaking about something that is not extremely clear to patients. So when you buy a drug, let's say an antibiotic for pneumonia, there has been typically a claim, or a drug for hypertension, for high blood pressure. There has been a study specifically addressing the question, a huge clinical study, typically with thousands of patients who are hypertensive, that actually clearly shows that this drug is effective in that. So you go to your physician prescribe it, and depending on the country where you are, the national health system or your insurance company will be covering the cost of the drug. And this is the normal pathway. What is the point with those drugs? Those are extremely expensive, they are on the market, but actually the clinical trial that allow them to be on the market are not for ECD, for erdheim-chester disease. But most commonly, those are studies for other drugs. For example, Zelboraf has been marketed for melanoma. So first you will be needing that the drug is available on the market, and really there are huge differences. For example, as Augusto was somehow pointing out, in Italy we do have problems in it's longer because in Italy government contracts a lot with and discuss a lot with pharmaceutical company to keep prices very low. So they discuss a lot before accepting a drug. But then, when the drug is there, still it has no indication. So there are huge differences between different countries. In Italy, for example, is somehow simple. So we have some problems when the drug needs to enter, so it takes longer when it enters the market. But then when it's there, if there's just one single case of a rare patient published that has been benefited by this drug, we can use that and give the patient for free. This is Italy, and this is, at least in one thing, we are a little bit forward and ready to this thing. It's completely different in France, and it's completely different in the US, and it's completely different. So what I want to point out, and this is again the main reason for which we are here, is that once a drug is officially approved for a disease, then no one can object to that. But the major problem that we and all of you are facing is so far those drugs have been licensed for different things. And this is the reason for which we need to cooperate together. And this is the reason for which we need to stick and make larger group and make larger studies like the one Juvianee is doing. Juvianee is doing a study that is specifically done for erdheim-chester. A number of colleagues of ours are doing that, which is actually aiming to get this registration, this coding, for which again those drugs will be univocally designated for be used for erdheim-chester disease.
I'm trying taking part at investigation in the trial of cohorts. And my question is, what do you think of having trials that are not concentrated or centered, more deregulated, because I am doing MRIs and CT scans and I'm led by Dr. Dagna, what I can do PET scans in the MRIs back in Sweden. So Dr. Diamond, he can then say that evaluate what does the result show. What I am doing it back in my home country. I don't know if it makes sense, but yeah. So the question is, what do you think about me having my test done back in Sweden and having the essentially to evaluate my tests? You get me?
So the question was particularly about having, with patients involved in clinical trials, having their tests done in their home country and being sent to the actual, being sent back to the actual clinical trial headquarters hospitals, such as like Memorial Sloan Kettering, and for such as mainly MRI scans, PET scans, being sent back for evaluation from a different radiologist to the clinical trial, and that being involved as part of the clinical trial. And that was the general question. I'm sure a lot of the panelists will have comments on that. I'll let them comment on it first because they have many different clinical trials about having tests done at another institution at another country and sent back to the headquarter institution for evaluation, and how that would play into clinical trials. So I'll pass this along to others, and I'll maybe answer anything if they don't answer it fully.
Even if it's not for a clinical trial, even from we have clinical trial, but maybe not as defined as the one from the Sloan Kettering or the NIH. It's always better to, if possible, it's always better to see the patient and to see. Sometimes when it's complicated, you can review, the files, like the MRI you're taking, like in your case in Sweden, and the PET scan as well, and then it can be sent like to Eli Diamond, and but the problem is it's always more complicated to compare images that have been done elsewhere, to compare the files that have been done locally. It's not impossible, but it's more time-consuming. Obviously, less than you flying to New York, but it's more complicated for a physician to not to have the patient on site. Obviously, if you have to go 8 or 9 times per year to New York, it makes it like complicated. And I understand your question, but this is even if it's this has nothing to do with the trial. It's just if taking care of patients, it's important to see the patient at least regularly. But I don't know what my colleagues say.
I understand you a lot because I do clinical trials, so I see this one all the time when I see someone who's not even from Sweden, who might be from Arkansas, but who just cannot drive 5-9 hours every week to meet the schedule of the clinical trial. So I think in the ECD, given the fact that there is a limited number of patients, we have to find a way how actually have some flexibility in a way which we do clinical research to make sure that we actually maximize the knowledge from what we can learn from you, as we also maximize your chance to benefit from what we are doing. So I think that's one of the challenges which we really need to put on our agenda, because Dr. Estrada-Veras is doing a trial which is supposed to lead in registration, and the trial so far enrolled 5 patients, which I mean is a great achievement. But on the other hand, I mean, if we had a mechanism how to do it more globally, we would probably have 50 patients now, and we would already have registration. But we haven't really come up with a mechanism how to do that. So I think we have to actually come up with a mechanism how not to only do trial, but how to bring these trials to our patients, and not locally but globally. And I think that's really something we need to come up with forward, and maybe that's something we need to think about once we leave this meeting how we make it happen.
It is with these meetings that your question really gives some thought to the clinicians that are designing the clinical trials. And it is a current movement within the rare disease community as a whole to have the conversations early on between the clinicians and the patient groups and the institutions to sit and talk about the design of the clinical trial. And it is those concerns of the individuals who will be participants in those trials that are brought forth about the travels. Is there a center of excellence that's going to be closer? So it's important that if you ever have questions about or concerns when looking at a clinical trial, and maybe there's a reason geographically or economically why you cannot participate, it really is important for you as an individual to share that with the researchers, to let them know, so that down the road you can sit and really make a really good clinical trial design where it takes all the concerns of the individuals as well as with the hopes of what the clinicians are looking to treat.
While Dr. McClain is preparing slides, I just want to make a final comment on what he said. You may be wondering why, again, Juvianee has this clinical trial, Julien has his clinical trial, Filip and so on, they have their clinical trial. Because it's really complex and costly it's difficult and complex to have a local clinical trial. It's hugely complex and costly to have a multi-centric clinical trial. And in this reason also, this is one of the, and also for coordinating this research is extremely costly. And this is another reason for which the erdheim-chester Global Alliance is doing a great work. Because really, even though some you may be feeling that some efforts are just local, this huge effort of coordination has been possible through these people, through every one of you, to the help, also the economical help that you gave to us to make this possible. Because again, it's perfectly clear what Julien just said and Filip said, that it's difficult to evaluate patients remotely, but it's really difficult and expensive, also from a regulatory point of view, to have multiple centers to do that. So every effort and every help that is coming through you, the Global Alliance, is something that is really helping us to move forward to this objective, which is actually giving all the people all around the world the same possibility to take part of this trial and to get the best drugs.
Ken McClain, I'm from Houston, Texas also. My hospital is about 100 meters from Dr. Janku's, and we come to foreign countries to see each other because we're both so busy. But I've been treating patients with histocytic disease for a number of years. I'm a pediatric oncologist, but for the last 27 years I've been seeing adults in my clinic. And I'm part of this alliance, and the ECD Alliance, because I think it's a very important effort, and what I can do to contribute is somewhat smaller than the institutions you've already heard from, but we're available to help also. So one of the points of what I am like to think about is that we have the abilities in our institution to do some basic science research. So as some of the other institutions, such as Memorial Sloan Kettering and Julien and Filip, we are able to do some very extensive genomic investigations and looking at what we call whole exome sequencing and biopsy specimens to look at the specific mutations that you've heard about, BRAF and some of the others, One of the things that we've done with the histocytic diseases in children is to look at proteins in the blood of the children who have these histocytic diseases, and we've defined certain groups of proteins that are associated with certain clinical situations. And I think this is something that could be done for the ECD patients also. It might help us understand the inflammatory background, and the Italian group has done a lot of this already, and there's the possibility of extending that work. Many of you are afflicted by central nervous system involvement. Your brain is somehow affected by ECD, and we have discovered some markers of the histocytic diseases in the spinal fluid of patients, which is, I think, going to help us with the diagnosis and management. And those same tools can be applied in ECD as we have applied them for children. So we are in the process of starting clinical trials with the BRAF inhibitors and the combination inhibitor, as you heard from the other investigators. And we're in discussion with drug companies because we're trying to open these for children and adults, and we're not quite as far along as some of the other institutions, but I think we'll get there eventually. So why be involved? Why are these studies important? Well, I think whether you're from France or Italy or Germany or the United States, if you can go to one of the institutions who is studying these diseases, your biopsy specimen, your blood, your spinal fluid can be very important to help us advance the knowledge of ECD biology. And it's through these advances we come up with new treatments, and you see the fruits of that labor already with the BRAF inhibitors. And we can look at the results of the treatments and see how they apply differently to different patients, and if they have different mutations, might just have a different outcome. So what will you have to do to be eligible for a trial? Well, as we were just discussing, in some cases that means coming to the city where the trial is held, or for us to develop a mechanism whereby we could partner with a local institution, and you could be treated at your home hospital, but yet send radiographic studies and clinical information to us. And these are complicated issues, as you've already heard, but I think something that needs to be worked on so that these trials are more readily available to everybody. So for some trials you have to come to Houston to be evaluated and to have some of the studies done. In these cases, the patients are responsible for travel and office visit. Research tests are not charged. Oftentimes we partner with a company so they provide the drug free of charge, and as you've heard, these drugs are extraordinarily expensive, and that's one of the real benefits of being on a clinical trial is that you often get a very expensive medicine for free. If you're coming to the city for a clinical trial, you probably need a companion to help take care of you in between hospital visits. And the length of stay depends upon what's going on with the trial, and if you need to be monitored weekly for a while, or if you can go home for a month in between the treatments. So as I mentioned, we're in discussion with some pharmaceutical companies to start these trials. They're not as yet open, but we will let the ECD Association know when they are open, and if we can be of help to you, we would be very glad to do that. And more importantly, I think we're very keen to partner with all the other physicians in the ECD community, because we're not going to see as many patients as some of these other institutions, but we want to contribute to the greater good for you, the patients, and for the scientific knowledge. So we're looking to partner and to help with the trials that other people are doing. So I thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thanks. My name is Augusto Vaglio, and I work in Parma in Italy as a nephrologist. We've been involved in erdheim-chester disease for the last 12 years. Our interest is mainly focused on a treatment based on mTOR inhibitor named sirolimus. We completed a trial that was published last year, and we are still interested in studying which abnormalities can lead to hyperactivation of this protein, which is called mTOR, and is targeted by specific treatments. And another field of interest is trying to understand whether there is genetic susceptibility to develop erdheim-chester disease, because we know that erdheim-chester disease, as Juvianee explained in his lecture, is usually driven, or most of the times is driven by mutations, so things that happens in certain cells and that are acquired mutations. That means that during your life at a certain time you develop this mutation, and these cells kind of change their structure, change the function, and proliferate. But there might be other reasons why you develop this kind of disease, and these reasons may be in your DNA, and these are genetic variants that can be in your DNA since you were born. And so we would like to launch this kind of study. These kinds of studies are called genetic association studies. They have two main problems. One is the number of patients, because these studies require hundreds of cases and money, of course. But we will try to start this progressively, and I will keep you updated on the evolution of this project.
Okay, first of all, I just said from the end user perspective, I've been on a clinical trial since January 15. I've been in the NIH with Juvi. Sorry, Dr. Estrada-Veras, my apologies. It's no doubt it is more daunting than basically just getting treatment, but I think the biggest advantage from the patient's point of view is the level of follow-up that you get, and especially with I can't speak for trials outside of the NIH, but I'm sure they're very similar, is that they actually leave nothing to chance. When you go for your exams, everything is monitored. And I would only say that the experience has been very positive. The drugs that I have been on for all of 2015, I was on combination therapy of trametinib and dabrafenib. There is no way I would have got those drugs in Ireland. We can't even get, it is very, very difficult to get venirafenib on its own, never mind trametinib. One of the questions I had for the panel is, what is the other indication for trametinib? What is it used for? And basically, you are dependent on the doctor that is writing the prescription, not to specify what he's writing the prescription for, in such a way that the medicines board will not know that you're being treated for erdheim-chester disease. I should add that I'm the only person in the country, so it's very unlikely that I'll ever get approval for this medication in Ireland. So it is an issue that I really would like to see progressed, is the actual to get approval for treatments, because it is really makes an awful difference, because I have medical insurance, I have the national insurance, but if the drug is not approved, everybody has a get out of jail card, so they don't have to pay for it if it's not approved. So I think the importance for the community as regards pushing on the trials that are really focused on getting the drugs approved, I think that is one of the areas that we should try and do to, if patients are eligible for a trial that is going to lead to the drug being approved, I think they should really seriously look at that. That's my point.
After that, because that's I have emotional bond with both dabrafenib and trametinib, since they were actually, the phase 1 was done mainly in my department. What we would like to see as a cancer drug developers was actually to kind of change the paradigm and perhaps actually move the approval, at least the preliminary approval, from one specific indication for which for dabrafenib and trametinib at the moment it's actually still like melanoma, it's really the main indication, to actually move to the concept that the approval would be at least on the conditional basis for actually BRAF mutant cancers. There are some caveats to that, because some BRAF mutant cancers do respond to dabrafenib and trametinib, such as lung cancer, such as thyroid cancer, and some don't, such as colon cancer. But I mean, at least that was our idea, to kind of move that shift around, which would essentially get generally the first conditional approval, and then at the same time it would be required to generate the data in so that some other cancers beyond melanoma. But at the moment it hasn't really reached it hasn't really found a fertile ground in the regulatory agencies. But I think that might be one way how to do that. The other way is actually to do it through something which is called basket trials. So essentially, once you actually define the dose of the medicine, then you move to the next step of the clinical testing. You have actually multiple baskets for different diseases, and essentially in small subsets of patients, you actually test the hypothesis. You essentially make a go or no-go decision whether the drug is actually working in that specific patient population or not. So that would be my 2 cents.
Hi, I'm an ECD patient from San Francisco, and like the gentleman behind me, I'm one of Dr. Estrada-Veras' Fab 5. The clinical trial with dabrafenib and trametinib. But my question is actually for Dr. Durham. Your trial using cobimetinib is very intriguing because you're treating not just ECD but other histiocytic diseases. It seems to me that a lot of the articles have been focusing on differential diagnoses for all of the histiocytic diseases. Is your research showing that there's more commonalities between some of these illnesses than was previously thought?
Yeah, a lot of the research is coming out is showing a lot of commonalities, but yet differences between the different histiocytic disorders. But like the direction of a lot of the clinical trials are going is to more of a histology-independent focus on the genetic aspect of the disease, which is like a BRAF mutation, or used for the cobimetinib is for a MEK inhibitor mutation, or like in our trials for if patients are BRAF mutated as well but are not tolerating vemurafenib trials very well, or are they not able to get the drug, then they're also being enrolled in the cobimetinib study. But our focus is that there's similarities. We're still working on understanding the biology, the differences of the different histiocytic diseases, including ECD, Rosai-Dorfman disease, Langerhans cell histiocytosis. We're seeing similarities in the biology, but there's also a lot of differences we're trying to work out. So our focus is now trying for treatment is to focus on the actual histology dependent, so not that independent, and actually having a mutation-driven treatment, so targeted therapy for the mutation in general, like the basket studies are doing. And I'll let some of the others comment on some of the trials that they're doing on that aspect, but that's at least my 2 cents on that.
So I'm Mark Heaney from Columbia, New York. One of the things that we are trying to introduce, and you've heard me talk about this already, is the registry. And that's really another way of evaluating the disease. And that would be a way where an MRI from Sweden could be uploaded into a database that could be then used to understand the disease better. And that's something that, as physicians in the community, we'd all have access to try to understand different aspects of the disease. And it will also allow for the collection of responses to different drugs, so that if 2 patients from France are taking cobimetinib and 4 patients from the US are taking cobimetinib, it may be possible to pool that information as a justification to do a formal clinical trial, or to gain enough information so that an insurer would feel comfortable that the drug is safe and effective and would provide some support for someone to take that. That registry is partly going to be driven by patients with ECD going to their physicians and saying, I'd like to participate in the registry. And patients will be entering some of the information about themselves directly into the registry, and then giving permission for their doctors to enter other clinical information. And then there will be mechanisms to allow some of the pathologic specimens to be entered and for some of the x-rays to be entered, so that we can try to understand the disease better. Dr. Collin here on my left is going to be spearheading this in Europe, and Eli Diamond is one of my colleagues in New York. This on Kettering will be spearheading it in the US. But the aim is really to make this global, and it's a way to allow patients who are in parts of the world like Australia and South America to benefit and to contribute to all of the knowledge.
Oui, bonjour, j'ai une question. Un des facteurs de risque peut être lié à une exposition aux métaux lourds, puisque en 1950, une maladie a été détectée au Japon. Elle s'appelle, ils l'avaient appelée Itai en 1950, mais ils n'avaient pas encore toutes ces technologies.
The question was whether or not this disease could be explained by trying to translate what is exposures to cadmium. Heavy metals, yeah. So I don't have the slightest idea. I don't know, because you were saying that there was a disease described Itai in 1950. Okay. All right. So, but I don't see what would the connection be with erdheim-chester and heavy metals. But maybe my colleagues have different opinions. I don't know how to answer. Okay.
I think we cannot confirm that, we cannot rule it out, I guess. That's, we don't really have any evidence supporting either way.
We're going to take a break. We've been waiting for that break. So we're going to take a break. We're going to try to get back here at 11:35. Be prompt, because we're going to start right away with our next presenter. So thank you.